Welcome back, my little nightmares. It's me, Queen Nightmare, and I'm going to be doing the Erised effect. We're going to do this, and we're going to do it nicely. Okay, it's Chapter 2, The Drinker. Well, that's hardly bloody fair. Theo huffed as a vial with pink swirling liquid was put in front of him on the table. Got to play by the rules, Harry muttered, sounding affronted as the same vial also placed in front of him. If everyone else has signed the disclaimer, but Malfoy hasn't, then you know better than I think. You know better than to think I would play by the same rules as everyone else, Potter. Draco told him in a mocking tone as he took a deep sip of his whiskey and accepted the vial that Pansy had passed him over the table. Did our time playing Quidditch at Hogwarts not teach you anything? Or the time you nearly got ruined by that hippogriff? Blaise pointed out. Or the time you got turned into a white rodent? Theo pointed out matter-of-factly. What about the time you nearly offed the old Dumbledore? Blaise replied. Hermione and Harry scowled at him. May God rest his soul. He added quickly, making a cross in front of him. He's probably Catholic. I'm not Catholic, so we don't do that. Or the time when he nearly threw himself through the stupid bloody cabinet in frustration. Theo laughed wholeheartedly. Hermione heard Malfoy draw in an impatient deep breath. It wasn't uncommon for Blaise and Theo to mock him for his previous dark deeds. He usually took it in his stride and bided his time, until he was able to get them back with some sort of sarcastic and usual, quite witted, retort. But tonight did not seem like the night for that. There are no rules. It is the drinker's choice, Pansy cut in, silencing the boys when she spotted the look of tension on Draco's face. She seemed to be grappling with himself. Okay. Hermione could sense it from where she sat. Almost as if he thought he was making a big mistake by signing the contract. Well, if I can't see his, then he can't see mine, Theo announced petulantly, pointing a finger at Draco's direction. I don't want to see yours, Theo. You'll put me off sausage for life. Damn! Draco said darkly, earning a titter from a few around the table. What was that? Theo asked sarcastically. Putting a hand to his ear and cupping it in Draco's direction. Jumbo hot dog, you say? Oh, you do compliment me, Draco. More like a cocktail sausage, mate. Have a strong word with yourself, yeah? Draco bantered back, and Hermione tensed as she glanced at Pansy. She saw her eyes sparkle when the mention of sausage size came into the equation. I got this. God have mercy upon her soul. Literally, please. Her train of thought also always seemed to lead back there, and Pansy didn't help. Once the floodgates of the dirt bag that was Pansy Parkinson had been opened, there was no stopping her. Several times. Emmy, what are you doing? Emerald? Oh, good grief. I don't know if she jumped down the stairs or fell down the stairs. Probably jumped. Whatever. Had been open. The dirt bag that was Pansy Parkinson had been opened. There was no stopping her. Several times, Hermione had choked on air whilst in work as a dirty fact of a smutty little musing had made its way out of Pansy's mouth. The worst one was just shy of 2 months ago, as they stood together in the lingerie section of the shop, fixing the array of bras and knickers on the shelves. "Did you see him sitting down last night?" Pansy asked innocently as she fixed a pair of frilly French knickers back onto their hanger. She looked so uncomfortable towards the end of. He looked so uncomfortable towards the end of the night. Hermione tried her best to ignore her. She knew exactly where Pansy was going with this, and if she let the girl bait her, then there would be no stopping the filth that will spill out of her mouth. Specifically, filth about Draco Malfoy. "I hadn't noticed," Hermione replied casually, like she always did, and hoped that Pansy would drop the subject. But Pansy Parkinson never dropped a subject. "I think that armchair is the only one that offers him a little relief from the pressure in the particular area," Pansy mused innocently. "I mean, I know he has his pants tailored to look a little baggier in the crotch area, but you can plainly see that he must be uncomfortable packing." "Pansy!" Hermione moaned at her and drew in a breath as she picked up a stray bra from off the floor. "Stop! Just stop!" Pansy paid absolutely no attention. "I suppose it can't be helped, though, with the way he looks at you when you're not looking." One of Pansy's eyebrows shot into the air as Hermione turned to her and gave her a suspicious look. "When you find something funny, but you know you shouldn't laugh, you bite your lip." Hermione frowned. "Draco likes it." Hermione's mouth went dry. "He likes to bite and be bitten when he's effing cool." Didn't need to know that. "That I know of, or involved in any type of foreplay." Pansy smirked at the blush on Hermione's cheeks. "I think it's paraphilia, called odaxlegnia. It is generally considered a mild form of sadomasochism, but I think Draco just gets off on the feel of his skin between your teeth." Hermione drew in another deep breath. "If he's close and you put your mouth on the right place." Pansy put 2 fingers across against the pulse part on her neck as she looked at Hermione. "If you use your lips to massage the area, add your tongue to moisten it, and then sink your teeth in at just the right moment," Hermione clenched her thighs at the thought, "the sounds he'll make for you, Granger, he'll be all yours." Hermione shook her head to try and get rid of the imagery, but the thought of biting down on Draco Malfoy's neck and hearing the deep rumbling sounds erupting from his throat as he finished for her were just too much. Would he talk to her through it? Ugh! Girl, calm down. Girl, it's okay. You don't need to think this part, right? Right. Would he want to tell her she was a good girl? What is wrong with this? Would he want to be buried deep inside her while he did that for him? While she did that for him? To achieve the most intense, I can't believe I'm saying this, orgasm he would probably ever have? As soon as he saw you bite your bottom lip last night, I knew exactly what he was thinking. Pansy smirked, continuing her onslaught. His eyes were so dark, they were practically blown wide. Granger, in his head, he had you straddling him over that armchair. He was occupying, and he was rocking your hips into his, effing you through your clothes. He loves doing that. Hermione gulped and closed her eyes at the imagery momentarily. He knows he can get a woman off just by rubbing her intimately against him. When you feel it close like that, you realize just how uncomfortable he really must be sitting down. But the power he puts into each thrust would have you bouncing off his lap. Pansy shrugged. But then, what is a big thing worth if there's no power, stamina, and passion behind it? Hermione's eyes went wide, and she dropped another bra onto the floor in a fluster. Hermione giggled. Draco has the power, whether he's holding you in his arms or making you feel protected, or he's pinned you down against a desk in Potions classroom after hours. The force of him is something unmatched. Pansy's eyes glinted devilishly. He would be on your knees for you in minutes, though, if you'd let him. He's strong then. Hermione said weakly. He's strong then? Hermione asked weakly, trying to ignore the last thing Pansy said and feeling like her knees would give out on her. Granger, Pansy told her pointedly. He put me on a desk, opened my legs, and effed me with his fingers, so hard that the desk rattled against the floor. I don't know where that accent came from, so I'm sorry. Before it started to move about a foot away from its starting point. Hermione put a hand over her mouth and shot in a shocked motion. And he wouldn't let me finish until I told him how much my walls wanted to clench around his thing. Hermione gasped and Pansy giggled at her. He's not an animal, though, Granger. Though, quite the opposite, actually. Pansy gave her a small smile. He has a lot of passion, and he always makes sure the lady comes first. Although he's not ever finished into a hand afterwards. He's only finished into a hand afterwards, so Hermione couldn't help herself. How do you know he's never orgasmed inside a woman? Pansy's eyes lit up devilishly. Oh, I knew that little fact got you all hot and bothered. She laughed gleefully, then fixed Hermione with a look. Because when he's drunk, he talks. And if I'm not mistaken, from what he's said in the past, I think he's all but given up hope for trying now. She gave Hermione a little wink. But if only there was one person who could volunteer to get past that barrier with him and give it a bloody good go. Hermione's back straightened. I don't know of anyone. Sorry, Pansy sighed. Crackers. Hermione, if you let Draco get a hold of you, then he'd break you in half. Hermione spluttered. Imagine the power of those thighs as he inched his way inside you slowly. Even when he stretches your legs wide, it would probably take him a few minutes to get all the way in, considering his size and the size of you. Hermione bit her lip. He'd bite that lip for you too. And then when he finally started rocking inside you, he'd be so far up he'd hit your cervix. Probably get you pregnant after the first pump against your womb. Pansy! Hermione hissed. That is uncalled for, the black-haired girl shrugged. I think he has a breeding fetish somewhere deep down. Hermione gaped at the girl. What? Her mind boggled. Sorry, I'm getting stuttering. I'm like, wait, when is this going? Hold on. There was so much kinky complex to this man, and it was making her feel like the multiple layers of Draco were never ending. Pansy raised an eyebrow and put a hand on her hip as she looked at a bra back. Looked a bra back into its place on the shelf. It's a whole different story, Granger. One for another time. No more stories. Hermione couldn't take any more stories. Hermione, do you agree? Or would you rather stay here? Huh? Darn it! If this ever happens to me, I'll feel so bad. I'll be like, I'm sorry, what we're doing? Hermione frowned from just the conversation. She was really bad at this lately. Knowing that she needed to keep up with the conversation, but couldn't help herself, but found herself so often floating away into her own sordid fantasies. What was that? Sorry? She said politely and saw Pansy looking at her knowingly. She took a large gulp of her drink. I wasn't listening. You haven't missed much, Malfoy drawled in a low tone from above her. Oh gosh! What did I do? What the fuck did I do? I would be like, oh my gosh, there's a big man behind me. Help! I'm scared. Mom. No, I'm kidding. Kidding. Bad joke, but I had to. His low tone from above her, sending shivers down her spine. As she realized, he stood up and put it on his coat as if to leave. Mostly just Theodore chatting absolute bollocks about how all his fantasies included wax and butt plugs. The butt plugs are for women! Theo shouted defensively, his closed umbrella pointing accusingly in Draco's direction. So he says. Draco answered him mockingly, pointing back at Draco as he buttoned up his black overcoat. Hermione could see Malfoy look over in her direction and give her a small smile out of the corner of her eye, but she just couldn't muster up the courage to look at him. If she did, she feared he would see right through her, and he would know all the illicit pictures that popped into her head whenever she was so much as looked in his direction. She wondered if he'd noticed the slow change in her over the last few years. She had always been civil and courteous to each other. They had always been civil and courteous to each other since Harry had brought him into the group. This, Draco Malfoy, was merely a small reminder to her of his former self, an unlikely, gentle, and quiet outcome to what he could have turned into. Hermione hated his former self, and one thing stopping her from jumping his bones was the thought of his sneering face during school. He never sneered at her, though. He listened to her intently, and when they conversed with each other, Hermione always got the sense that she understood him as much as he understood her. He was polite and quiet and kept to himself. At first, it put Hermione on edge, as she found it hard to find ways to trust him. But now she knew that, along with the others, she could also trust Draco Malfoy with her life. Trusting him with her life wasn't the problem, though. It was trusting herself around him to not make an absolute fool of herself. She felt like a schoolgirl with a silly crush on a popular boy. It felt so immature to her, but she couldn't help it. Every part of him intimidated her and made her feel like she couldn't breathe. Hold a second. Sorry, I'm back. I had an itch on my nose. Okay. Every part of him intimidated her and made her feel like she couldn't breathe when she was around him. Around her. He was around her. Thank God she only even saw him on Friday nights. She'd be a pining mess if she had to be around him more often. We're going to Draco's, Granger. Pansy practically squeaked with excitement. Apparently Harry is against the idea of taking the potion in the middle of a crowded pub, in case he gets too excited during his fantasy and sees his CUM face. I'm not saying the real word. I only say finish, because if I said the real word, I think I would be demonetized. I'll spell it, but that's pretty much it. Harry shook his head and... That's not exactly how It's what you meant. Pansy batted his arm matter-of-factly. Let's just call a spade a spade. Or a shovel. Theo interrupted. That way you can use it to bury yourself when you've died of complete humiliation, if anyone's seeing this. Theo opened his mouth and stuck out his tongue, put his head back and rolled his eyes into the back of his head. What the fuck was that? Theodore, Blaise asked, looking disgusted as he zipped up his coat. Because if that's your CUM face, then I generally wonder how you've ever gotten a woman in bed. It's late by then, mate. Theo winked at him, putting his woolly hat messily on top of his head. Past the point of no return if she doesn't like it. She can just close her eyes, lie back, and think of England. I'd think of anything to get that image out of my head. Bondage, torture included. Hermione laughed, putting her scarf around her neck. Hermione heard the laughs of everyone, but she noticed Malfoy still his actions and slow them down as he fixed his coat collar just within her eye line. Didn't have you down for a bit of kink, Miss Granger. Blaise answered her with a wiggle of his eyebrows. Had you pegged as a bit of a vanilla, as innocent as a nun in a cucumber field. Leo butted in jovially. Pansy scoffed as she put her bag over her shoulder. Oh, please. I could turn your blood cold with the kink toys Granger has bought from our store over the years. She turned and grinned wickedly at Hermione, who felt her flush return. Remember that potion you bought to help you climax loudly? Harry choked and sputtered on thin air, but put his hand over his ears. Pansy! Hermione berated and stuck for words. Mortified, Hermione chanced to glance over everyone for their reaction. Eventually, her eyes traveled to the blonde man's direction. Malfoy was stuck still, his not facing her, as his back was to her, but his shoulders seemed to move slightly for a second, like he was taking in a deep breath. Granger, the screamer? Now there's an image, Theo said wickedly, and Blaise chuckled. No, that's the problem, Pansy said gleefully. Hermione really hated the fact that she hadn't even and Hermione had hated the fact that she had even told Pansy this sensitive little tidbit of information. She doesn't make noise. No one has ever been able to make her scream. They're lucky to get a moan out of her. Are you a quiet one, Granger? Blaise asked her curiously. Is it because you're embarrassed or because nobody has hit the right notes for you to speak? I'm not answering. Pansy started to protest. Don't be modest, Granger, Pansy told her with a shake of her head. Hermione here has only ever had an orgasm by herself. Men have tried, but failed to conquer her fortress. Hermione has... These euphemisms are marvelous. I love this already. I love this story. Hermione was about to retaliate, but a small sound from where Draco was had stopped her. It was a small noise. It was barely audible. It sounded so guttural and dangerous that caught her attention. Draco Malfoy was listening to the conversation intently. Granger. Why didn't you say? Granger. Why didn't you say? Theo asked her, arms outstretched in a sympathetic gesture. You only need ask. I mean, give me 5 minutes with you and you'll what? Disappoint her even more? Wait. Let me re-say that. You only need ask. I mean, give me 5 minutes with you and you'll what? Disappoint her even more? Hermione felt like she was holding her breath as Malfoy's low voice came out like a growl. Theo cocked an eyebrow at the tall blonde. And you think you could do better with the girl? He asked mockingly. Tell us, oh great and all-knowing one, what would you do to get her making noises for you, then? Oh no! Why did it turn this way? Theo, don't do this! Hermione felt her head spinning as she looked over at Malfoy. He was looking sideways at Theo, a hand resting against the fireplace as his back was still to her. For a moment, everyone stood in silence, nobody daring to make a sound. I find getting a girl to talk is usually the best way to start, was Draco's eventual reply, and Pansy was almost wetting herself with excitement as she looked over at Hermione as he spoke. After that, anything else is fair game. Hermione felt the need to close her eyes and let his words wash over her. A bit dirty talk. She'll be begging for anything you give. Theo asked him with a raised eyebrow, shouting your name from the rooftops like she's at Sunday church. Draco chuckled darkly, and the sound shot directly into Hermione's core. Something like that, yeah. He said, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand. Every time. If Hermione didn't know, this would, look differently. But now that she knows, oh my gosh, does Draco know that she knows? Is that my... Hermione swallowed thickly and didn't know where to put her eyes. He gave details away, but then never really gave anything away at all. Like he was letting her take a peek into his world, but then pulling back at the last second. Bitch! Stop playing these games! I don't play these games. Harry had his hand covering his face now, as Hermione wanted to die. Do you want to borrow my shovel when I'm done with it? He asked her quietly beside her. She felt the flush creep all over her skin as she glowered at... Is it growled or glowered? Because it's spelled glowered at Pansy. She couldn't help the knowing thought of asking why the witch had gone there and told them all her private, intimate details in the first place. Hermione saw Pansy's eyes move slightly, a subtle movement in Malfoy's direction. Braving another glance, Hermione looked over at him. Only this time, with his back to her, she watched him clicking his neck and shoulder muscles by moving his head from side to side slowly. He kept his head down and buttoned up his coat and stood back from everyone else, seeming to need to take his time with something. Hermione looked back at Pansy and frowned. Pansy's eyes lit up when Hermione looked at her. As the small group of men made their way to the fireplace beside Draco, around to the flue, Draco's little flat in Kent. Hermione grabbed Pansy's elbow and squeezed as she went past her. What did you do that for? She hissed quietly, fixing with a stern glare. You're so embarrassing. Oh, it had the desired effect, though. Believe me, Pansy whispered back in her ear. As Pansy said the words, a flash of green caught Hermione's attention in front of her. She looked up to see Draco looking at her through the small mirror at the side of the fireplace. Expression unreadable as always, but his eyes engulfed her, and she felt hot and heavy weight start to travel all the way from her stomach into her core. Hermione's breath was next to her ear as she whispered in low, but Hermione never took her eyes from Draco. We've made him imagine what it would be like to make you moan for him, she said coyly. Freaking A. Oh. He likes to be the first, Granger, she added. Uh-oh. No! I'm all for it, but at the same time, I don't think Hermione's ready. Just making it speed up more. It made a single shiver run down Hermione's spine. He wants to be the one to make you scream. Nice place you've got here, Malfoy. Harry admired. Much better than you moping around in that big bloody manor like a lonely half-breed giant. I'm still decorating, was all Draco said as he shed his coat and put it over the arm of the black leather armchair. Where's the green and the silver? Theo asked mockingly as he stepped out of the flue and looked around at the white painted walls and the Georgian-styled furniture. Don't let me down, Draco. I fully expected vanishing cabinets and basilisks running around in the pipework. Heir of Slytherin, beware, and all of the bollocks. I didn't think bollocks was spelled that way, but then again, in my mind, it's weird. That's my old schoolmate. The bedroom gives off a bit of a Death Eater vibe, though, if that satisfies your stereotypical views. Draco answered in a deadpan tone, and with a swish of his wand, a silver platter appeared on the table. A tumbler with tumbler glasses, whiskey, and red wine. Hermione's preferred choice of poison. You're a bad, bad man, Mr. Malfoy, Theo replied as he took a tumbler and filled his glass. The women must run a mile when you put on your mask. Hermione chanced a glance at Draco, who settled himself down casually in the leather armchair to gesture for everyone to take a seat. Only the ones who don't enjoy a little scare. Hermione felt his eyes look over her momentarily. The scream is half the fun, though. If tensing her thighs wouldn't have attracted attention, then she would have done so. She would have taken deep, calming breaths and counted to 10 to escape the thoughts of Draco Malfoy, laying her back on the bed and making her scream for him. Oh gosh, how she wanted to scream for him. She wanted to wrap her thighs around his head and ride his tongue until her hips were shuddering under his skilled lips. Wow. Cool. She wanted him to pick her up, throw her against the nearest wall, and force his way inside of her. Make her really scream for him. But that was only child's play compared to what Draco Malfoy apparently got up to between the sheets. According to Wikipansia, Pansia, there you go. To satisfy his frustrations at the lack of penetrative sex, Draco Malfoy tended to spend his time pleasuring women in the bedroom in all different kinds of kinky and dominating ways, choosing to finish himself off later, away from prying eyes. I really do hope you all catch my fantasy of Daphne Greengrass playing the part of Swedish milkmaid who can't find a cow to milk and lands her eyes upon yours truly in her desperate hour of need. Oh my gosh. What is wrong with Theo? Theo's voice cut jovially through her train of thought. She had good technique in that little scene. Pansy eyed him and pursed her lips. You disgust me, Theodore, truly. I hope mine is the threesome I've always wanted. Blaise trailed in as he slouched in his seat next to Harry. Almost got my wish a few years ago. Just didn't bank on it being two males who proportioned me. Ooh, honey. Draco shook his head, but kept quiet. I was rather hoping mine might be something to do with Quidditch. Harry started. Ah, yes, Theo interrupted, sounding nostalgic. The timeless classic, getting your knob gobbled behind the Quidditch stands, fantasy. All four boys sighed, nodded in agreement, and went into their own little worlds momentarily. Hermione and Pansy were left crinkling their noses at the thought. Do you realize that none of you are in control of what your fantasies are about? Don't you know that? Hermione asked them all curiously. There was a mixture of furrowed brows and surprised, widened looks. This potion is designed to bring forward your deepest, darkest sexual fantasies. Things that you really want, whether you want to admit them to yourselves or not. She felt Draco rest his stare on her intently, like he was trying to read her mind, find out her own fantasy, find out what made her tick, and then use it against her in the most perviously delicious way. Well, shit. Hermione heard Blaise say, and looked up. So it could be anything, like anything? Scared we'll find out about your love for bestiality, Zabini. Pansy laughed at her, and drank her wine. Poor Granger, she'll be a nervous bloody wreck between you and Mr. Dark and Brooding over here. Draco shifted in his seat as if realizing that this was indeed an issue. He really was about to let Hermione peer into his thoughts, like he was at risk of showing her how deeply depraved he really was. Still think it's unfair that we're all airing out our dirty laundry, but dear Draco over there gets to keep his a secret, Theo said ruefully. Makes me wonder what he's got to hide. Pansy put her head down and gulped down her wine as the conversation took an awkward tone for her. Awkward in the sense that Hermione was about to find out exactly what Draco had to hide. You know me, Theodore, Draco told him in a low and menacing voice, stretching his legs fully in front of him, his intimidating size fully showcased. I don't like to kiss and tell. Pansy smirked. Luckily for you, I did quite a lot of that at Hogwarts. Hermione frowned. And she was still bloody well at it now, too. She knew Draco smirked back at Pansy, but before she saw Draco smirk back at Pansy before leaning forwards to pour himself another whiskey. You gave me quite the rep back in school, Pans. Don't think I ever really thanked you for that, he told the witch with a small laugh. Is he shit, Pansy? Theo asked mockingly. Please tell me he was shit. That it was all just a lie to make us mere mortals cry ourselves to sleep at night at the thought of never comparing to the Slytherin prince. Draco stuck his 2 fingers up in Draco's and Theo's direction as he drank his drink. I'm not saying a word. Also, by the way, when someone does this, they put, it's the opposite of the peace sign. It's the FU in, I don't know if they still use it, but I think it's the French. No, it's the English against the French. And what would happen is that they're such good. I'm so hungry. Sorry. That they're such good archers in France that they would cut off the 2 fingers, the middle finger and the pointer finger, because sometimes it would only be 1. So that's how we used the middle finger. But they would always go like this, the backward peace sign, back at someone because it's an FU to the French. Meaning like, ha, you haven't got my 2 fingers, like, FU. That's what it means. Just to let you know, if you don't understand what he's talking about. I learned that out a little while ago, which is cool. He said as Hermione glanced up at him, for a second and caught her eye. He caught her eye. I always let the woman be the judge. Oof! Well, we're about to find out if the rest of you can put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. Pansy announced, putting down her wine glass. So, who wants to go first? The boys all pointed at each other in turn. Okay. Why don't they, put them in a separate room and then they can watch it? No, Pansy, yeah, everyone pointed to each other. Clearly, the cat had suddenly mauled out their tongues. Pansy tapped her food. I'm guessing it's supposed to be foot. Impatiently, and then turned to Theo. You. Me? He said innocently, pointing to himself. Why me? Because you're one of mine, and I'm selfish, and I want to go first. Pansy told him in a whiny voice. What about Potter? Theo protested, pointing at the other male. Oi, don't bring me into it. She wants you. Harry answered defensively, but took 2 massive gulps of his fire whiskey. Pansy pulled up a chair in the middle of the living room and motioned for Theo to get himself up and then sit on it, huffing and puffing about the unfairness of life. Theo reluctantly took off his hat and coat and scarf before setting his drink down on the coffee table and going to sit on the chair in front of Pansy. Hermione, can I get the vial from Theodore's? Can you get the vial from Theodore's coat pocket, please? As everyone made idle chit-chat, Hermione shifted her way over to the coat next to Draco's and bent slightly to dig through the pocket. As she turned, the backs of her calves brushed against his thigh. Ooh! Ooh! Girl! Yum. Against his... Wait, where was that? Against her calves brushed against his thigh. Hermione could have sworn that she heard him in a small intake of breath at the touch. Warring with herself, she bit her lip, but she instantly felt his eyes attach themselves to her face on the action. Her fingers reached for the vial, but the intensity and heat of his gaze made her look sideways at him. He wasn't looking for her eyes. He hadn't even noticed that she was watching him. He was too busy fixating on the lips caught between her teeth. He was too busy controlling his breathing and calming his exterior to see that she was staring at him intently. I need some water. That's it. Hold on. Water break. Doo-doo-doo. Okay, I'm back. I had some crackers and water. Okay. It was mere seconds, but it felt like so much more. As Hermione let go of her lip between her teeth, she looked away from him. The only telltale sign of her taking him in was the blush on her cheeks. She felt his eyes avert, and he brought a fist up to cough into as he looked away completely and opened another button on his Oxford. Those are expensive coats, aren't they? Or is it suit? Sorry. It's not an expensive suit, like really expensive. I have to look up. And then me editing at this time, okay, put up the sale price, and I will convert it to dollars and pounds. By the way, I found out 1,000,000 yen is $9,000 in America. And I went, it's not a lot to us, but a lot to them. Wow. It's different. Cool. Hermione regained composure. Oxford, looking bothered by something. Hermione regained composure and brought the vial to Pansy, whose eyebrows were raised in a telling way, and the black-haired witch mouthed very good to her, seeing the whole thing play out in front of her. Right, Theo, she said, suddenly becoming serious. Drink this, and we can get started. See what you're really all about. Theo eyed it suspiciously before pulling out the stopper and smelling it. Ooh, raspberry, ripple, and coconut. Harry raised an eyebrow. Does this potion have a trace of Mortentia in it? He asked casually. I remember smelling my favorite scents within that in 6th gear. Pansy nodded. Only a small increments. It helps to build the senses. I think. Make the fantasy as strong and as believable as possible. It's an expensive potion to stock and buy. You want to make sure you're getting your money's worth, though. Pansy really did have a great sense at times, especially when it comes to money and sex. But put them both together, and Pansy was lethal. She could be a pimp. Oh, jeez. No. Great. He said, Theo took one last sniff before shrugging. Oh well, he said, holding the vial up to toast everyone in the room before putting the vial to his lips. Bottoms up. See you all on the other side. Oh boy. The pink liquid disappeared. Blacks of Theo's eyes turned pink. Oh shit. Breathed Blaze as the situation currently drawing down on him as he watched Theo's unmoving body sitting straight up in the chair. Up on the chair. Hermione looked over and saw Pansy bring out the small 5-by-7-inch rectangular mirror with pink edging. Walking back up to Theo, she grabbed his hand and pressed both Theo's and her thumbs on the mirror before dropping his hand again. What's happening? Harry asked as he walked up behind Pansy. And peered into the mirror. Has it worked? Hermione could see nothing but their reflections in the mirror. Just give it a minute, Pansy said impatiently as everyone started to crowd around her. It needs time to access the part of his brain that suddenly there was a blinding white light bouncing out of the mirror, caused everyone to shield their eyes and take a step backwards. Hermione stepped back onto her left foot and found her back colliding with somebody's very broad front. She didn't need to look around to know who it was. Sorry, she said quietly as she turned her head to the side, unable to see his face at the top of her head. And didn't quite reach his shoulder. His chest still shouldn't seem to be pressed against her back, giving her a warm, tingling feeling. No, you're not, Granger, he whispered back in a gruff voice, his breath wisping past her ear and making her own breath hitch or catch. He said it so loud enough that for her to hear when finally he stepped out of her space. He left her back cold, but he was still able to see the mirror from over the top of her head, where Pansy still had hold of it. "Oh, look!" Pansy said excitedly, squealing with delight. "It's working! It's working! Look! I can see him! I can see Theo!" She stopped dead and her mouth suddenly gaped open as Pansy watched the mirror. With the others unable to take her eyes away. Hermione's eyes widened at the sight. "Oh no! Oh dear, Theo, you naughty boy! Oh gosh! No!" Oh, water break. I wonder what's gonna happen next, but I'm all for it. Okay, chapter 3, the pacing game. Oh gosh, no! An hour later, Theodore not with his head in his hands. Hermione was not 100% sure that he was even completely conscious, as he did not move. He had not moved within the last few minutes. He did, however, curse expletives under his breath as he sat there. So at least he wasn't dead. Nobody wanted to look at each other. It was far too awkward, when even Pansy seemed to be lost for words as she sat on a footstool beside Theo, tapping her knee sympathetically as he let out small wails of anguish every now and again. Harry piped up, causing everyone whiplash as they turned their heads to see to him for breaking the silence. "It wasn't as bad as you think," Plane snorted, but then swallowed his laugh to disguise his mirth. "Yeah, mate, it was a little romantic," Hermione added in a suggestion, hoping her voice sounded hopeful enough to make Theo feel a little better. Because, massage that leads to sex can be quite lazy. Draco finished for her from his place on the love seat behind her. His body was large that he practically took up the whole space. Only Theodore not could have fantasy in which he lies back and lets the lady do all the work. I mean, that could be sexy. Like, you could be injured from something and you let your lady do anything she wants. I mean, that could be sexy. I'm trying to be hopeful. I'm sorry, Theo. But it can be. Not all the time. But, I mean, hey, letting your girl do what she wants. I mean, I think that can spice up your life a little bit. I don't know, after, 10 years of marriage, though. She did not do all the work. In the end, anyway. Theo protested with a sigh. Hermione flushed. It might have looked like a little lazy at first, but she had to admit that she had actually found it highly erotic to stand there and watch. Theodore quite clearly had some imagination when it came to foreplay. I mean, yeah, a lot of people don't have imagination to foreplay. So I guess it was good. Although the other various scenarios they had turned into before settling on the main act did make Hermione's eyes widen slightly at one point that even Theo looked like he wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. But the way he moved, he pulled around her legs yet again. Within the last hour, she kept like she could have soaked her knickers completely. She's a lady. She needs someone. Gosh, she horny all the time. between what she saw and heard with Theo's little encounter and minor situation that was occurring with Malfoy was Theo's fantasy unfolded. She felt like she needed a cold shower and possibly even a vibrator. The massage isn't going to ruin your reputation. It's... Theo started shaking his head in defeat. It's the butt plug? Blaze offered innocently. The gag? Harry interjected, a small smile on his face. Your cum face? Pansy asked instantly. Theo wailed again. You can all piss off! He huffed and brought himself out of the hot seat before taking a tumbler of whiskey and draining the whole thing. Oof. How was I supposed to know Luna Lovegood would be an actual freak between the sheets? He shook his head. It was a drunken one time. It was one time a year or so ago. And since then, all I've been able to think about is riding crops and rather persistent need for Star Wars roleplay. Pansy and Blaze widened their eyes. You didn't hear that? Theo pointed accusingly at them, taking a gulp of whiskey that was handed to him. You did not hear that. Hermione and Harry laughed knowingly. They were both aware of how Luna's mind worked. It turned out one fateful roll in the sack with her a few years ago was all Theo's imagination needed to continually run wild with more fantasies about her. They were all about her. Everyone thinks they're a freak until they meet an actual freak. Draco interrupted from his place on the love seat, a smirk on his lips as he viewed Theo. Then they suddenly find themselves tied up with a butt plug stuck between their ass cheeks, wondering just how on earth they managed to get themselves into that position on a Tuesday night. Not helpful in the slightest. Thank you. The Giganator. Wow. Okay, I never heard of that. Thank you, Giganator. Theo sniffed indignantly as he downed another glass of whiskey. Hermione put her head down. Every time she heard Malfoy's gruff, gravelly voice, it brought back the heat between her legs at the thought of his innocent breathing near to her ear, his low tone as he spoke to her quietly, knowing that no one else could hear him as they were too busy enthralled by watching Theo's adventure. She was even sure whether she had even imagined the whole thing, or if he had indeed been stood directly behind her the whole time. 1 hour earlier. Is it possible to throw up your own intestines? I'm sure this is illegal in several countries. Turn it off, Pansy, for the love of gosh. I can't grasp control of it properly. Pansy exclaimed as she grappled with the flashing images of the screen. There was too many of them. Theodore Knott was a randy little bastard, and his multiple fantasies were wearing with each other on the scene. Told you that butt plug wasn't just for women. Hermione heard Draco breathe from behind her, close to her back. The mirror currently showed them the image of Theo bound and gagged with an apple in his mouth, and image with Theo bound and gagged with the apple in his mouth, being tickled with a feather on a bed, whilst a blonde inserted his butt plug into his rectum. Freaking hey, my dude. I just have to limit the stuff on this because it's not full sex. Okay, good. Oh, okay. Blaze winced and covered his eyes. Change the channel for the love of all that is sacred and holy, Pansy. It might be like a radio wave, Harry instructed, and then winced as Pansy fiddled with the mirror in a different and particular sordid fantasy, including the same blonde-haired girl, and a riding crop came into view. Theo was face down on the bed this time, hands bound behind his back, an apple still in his mouth, as the girl whipped his ass. Try honing in on the frequency that is the strongest. That might be the one that he most desires. He wasn't lying, Pansy mused, turning her head to the side to view Theo properly. He does have quite a nice ass. Is that? Harry asked curiously, bending in further to get a better look, his glasses on the end of his nose. Luna? If it was, then Luna was handy with anal beads. Oh my gosh. Pansy tittered. Yes, he's been secretly obsessed with her since he shagged her a year or so ago. She's been in all of these flash fantasies so far. Pansy observed the feather outfit that fantasy Luna was wearing. So stereotypical of Theo. I'm so disappointed, she tooted. Theodore not, and Luna Lovegood. Who'd have thought? They were quite possibly the opposite of each other, and yet their minds met on a sexual level. Quite obviously. Does she know he feels that way about her? Hermione asked as her eyes widened at the leather basque and the stockings that Luna appeared to be wearing. Has he ever told her? He's never said a word. Draco said in a low voice from behind her back, making her skin pimple with goosebumps. He's just let it simmer away inside himself for a while, scared of the rejection. His voice became like a growl. Imagine that, Pansy said in an innocent voice as she casually glanced at Draco, ignoring Theo's muffled cries in the mirror as he was continually ripped in the ass with the crop. Imagine wanting someone so much but never giving into the temptation because you were too scared of the implication. Hermione put her head down and she heard Draco taking a deep breath from behind her and felt him shuffle his feet on the floor and move his front just the smallest bit closer to her back. I think you found it, Pansy, Blaze said cheerily as the mirror flashed and the scene within it became clearer and less static. This might be the one. It's clearer than the others. Oh. Hermione craned her head toward the mirror a little and then felt her mouth go dry at the sight. The Ravenclaw girls' dormitories swam into view. Hermione watched as Theo and Luna appeared in the room, looking hungrily at each other as they stood by her bed. "I want you to lay on your stomach first, Theo," Luna said as she pulled the covers down back on her bed for him. He took off his shirt, so he exposed his muscles that rippled beneath it. Then he went to the bed and laid down on his stomach, completely still, like an animal being stalked. In a way, he was. And Luna seemed to smile at the thought of putting her hands on him. Luna climbed up on the bed, straddling Theo's back, and Luna started straight down on his firm os, feeling it press up against her core. The muscle on his back rippled as he moved his arms up above his head. Theo inhaled deeply, and his rib cage expanded before he let it out slowly, audibly shying. Luna put her hands down onto his strong back. The heat coming off of his skin must have felt nice against her palms as she leaned her weight into him. Rubbing his tight muscles, Luna worked over his muscles and seeing his back move as the pressure eased. "How's that? Too much pressure?" Luna asked. No, it's perfect. You can even go harder if you want." Theo grunted, obviously feeling the muscles relax. "Okay." She then seemed to put all of her weight onto her hands, and at the same time she was rubbing her groin had started grinding against his os, and she knew that he could feel it. Sorry. Going on. Theo was well aware that she could make herself finish just from that if she wanted to. "You're not going out with anyone?" she asked. He paused for a moment, then answered, "No, not really. You?" "No, there was a man from the village of Brindley last month, but nothing serious. I'm okay being single for a while. Same, if I'm honest." Theo could tell pressure that was building up stronger within her, as her hips grinding down a little harder as she worked. Luna could probably feel it in her core now as she rocked it hard into his os. While she did that, she was also doing her best to concentrate on rubbing his back. Her knickers were probably soaked through by now. "Would you mind doing my pecs?" he said with a grunt. "I used them quite a lot while playing Quidditch with the boys yesterday." "Oh, please!" Hermione heard. "Oh, please!" Hermione heard Draco's low tone whisper to her right. So close to her back to get a view of the mirror that his abdomen was almost flush against her. "So this the best he's got?" he whispered so quietly near to her ear that she knew she was the only one who could hear him. She chanced to glance to her right. "And you think you could do better?" She asked him, her voice as quiet as his. She felt his eyes upon her, staring at her intently. "Don't challenge me," he growled, and sent a shiver down her spine. Hermione said nothing, but kept watching the scene unfold in front of her. She was fully aware that now that Draco's presence was about to take her away from the task at hand, she had to try and resist for the sake of her sanity. Hermione honed back in on the mirror. Okay. Luna leaned forward and she put her hands down on the bed, one on each side of his body, and lifted her hips off his ass so he could flip over. When Theo turned, her face was about 6 inches from his chest. She looked down at him and was looking up, and he was looking up at her. Their eyes held each other for a moment. Then he looked away, suddenly nervous. Then, with a small smile to herself, she suddenly lowered her hips down onto his and felt what he knew she was hoping she would. His thing was hard and was pressing against his shorts and got into her wet you-know-what. And they both let out a low groan as Theo grabbed her hips to steady her. If that was me, I'd grab her hips firmly and rock her against me. That voice, that rough and ready voice, make her hit the spot she needs straight away. Have her head thrown back in time. His tone was dark and dangerous, and his voice is so low and close to her ear. Now that she could feel his breath on her neck, the way he described everything as the image played out on the screen, it just brought it to life all the more. I like a challenge. Hermione shuddered and tried to steady herself against his words as she watched as the couple in the mirror looked at each other. Panting, with only the couple of pieces of fabric separating them now, Luna didn't look at him, but she must have known he was watching her. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Luna nodded. Luna nodded slowly, looking down at his chiseled abs. If she had any idea of stopping this, she had to do it now. Otherwise, Theo knew that they were getting to the point of no return. But Theo couldn't stop now if his life depended on it. He never could. I missed you since the last time, Luna said softly, meeting his eyes now. I missed you too. Need you. Theo closed his eyes and took a deep breath, reaching his hands up like he might touch her. Then he clenched his hands into fists, put them down by his side. He needed her to be the one to start this. She took one of his hands. It was big compared to hers, and she pried his fist open and interlocked her fingers with his. Theo? His eyes were still closed. Yes? Without another word, Luna took the reins and brought his hands up to her chest and put him on her breasts. Cool. His eyes shot open when he realized where his hands were. He didn't move it away, but he didn't squeeze her either. If he massaged it just the right place, there, he could have... Why? He could have pecked her you-know-what through the shirt. Draco whispered in. Hermione felt his abdomen raise and fall against her back. Half the fun is anticipation before the touch of the bare skin. The feel of the fabric doesn't have feel of the fabric against her taunt. Things would have her making all kinds of noises. His voice was raspy as he talked. They don't need to be big, over-exaggerated touches either. Hermione sucked in air when she felt large fingers with their feather-like touch skimming along her clothed hip. The ghost of sensation, not knowing if she was actually imagining it all or not, had her head spinning just enough to get the right reaction. Hermione tried her best to concentrate on Theo and Luna. It's not gonna work, my dude. They locked eyes and Luna nodded at him to take control. Theo lurched up and wrapped his big arms around her and then kissed her mouth hard, pulling her down on top of him. The intense with which he kissed her was a surprise to him. But once his tongue was inside her mouth, probing her, it made him snap fully into the moment as his senses took over. He seemed to forget that this was wrong. They shouldn't be doing this in the Ravenclaw's girls' dormitory. He forgot all of it. It was just her body against his now. Without... Oh, I look pale. Oof. Sorry, I look down at my legs and I have goosebumps because I'm cold. I'm going to get my blanket. Hold on. Because I'm going to be out here for a while. Girls' dormitories. He forgot all about it. All of that. It was just her body against his without any worries. Theo put his massive hands on her butt, pulling down on it, at the same time pushing his hips up into her. His thing throbbing through his boxers against her. Luna moaned, head thrown back as he rubbed himself against her. I'm going to say this. Can we throw moist out of the picture? I can say like a moist cake, but I can't say it in sexual terms. As you can tell, I'm hungry. Her moist entrance. He pushed her hips back onto his, grinding against him hard. Hermione felt Draco's fingers flutter against her hip bone as Theo and Luna moaned. Hermione bit her lip to hold in the small squeak as her breath ghosted her ear, breathing as heavy as she was. If you can get the right angle through the clothing, you'll be practically effing each other senseless. Ah! My dude! Is this like real? Like, does someone know the secret of this? Oh my god. Cool. Okay, this is gonna be a cool series. I don't know what I'm doing. Hermione saw him look at her face from the corner of his eye. He was bound to see how flushed she was. It's all about the pressure. His fingers lay a little firmer on her hip bone, but he made no move to pull her back against him. Get the pressure right, and you'll be screaming for your life. Hermione was in big trouble. Her legs were trembling, and he was barely touching her. His words and the way he said them, so low and intimate just for her. But he had to try and ignore enough to concentrate on Theo. This was research. They needed the research. Theo broke away from the kiss and turned his head away. Shit, we can't do this. Luna grabbed his chin and pulled his face back to look at her. Theo, she asked in a whisper. Yeah? He furrowed his brow. The other girls will be coming in here about 10 minutes. Theo's eyes widened. Shut the fuck up. Yeah, something inside him snapped. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in a hug and rolled over as she was on the bottom now. Her legs wrapped around his hard, exposed torso. When he pulled her school shirt up as they to show her they were were exposed to the air, and he grabbed on one of his with his hand and leaned down to suck on one of them. And licking and sucking. And I'm like, well, isn't that normal? I mean, mention one thing that doesn't do that when they are touching the boobs. The boobs. Oh my gosh. She ran her fingernails through the back of his hair. And while he was teasing her with his mouth, while he licked and grabbed at them, she worked her shirt off that now she only had her school skirt and black knickers on. Blowing on her bump would cause more of an effect before he touched her there properly. Hermione squeezed her legs together. Then she felt her hips being squeezed lightly again, the minimum of touches, and it made hers peak. Like I said, it's the anticipation. He bent down a little lower to her ear, the not knowing how far he will take it if he'll just stop. And as he said the word stop, his fingers weren't on her hips anymore, and she had to swallow a small groan that wanted to escape her throat. What is this? Hermione tried her hardest to focus on the mirror, her mind now swimming with the anticipation and frustration from a few words and small touches. Theo, Luna moaned. He looked up at her. I want you to F me. She looked in a breathy moan. She said in a breathy moan, Are you sure? I've never been more about anything. I loved the way you felt. Frig! Who says this? I mean, I've never heard this unless it was in a adult film. Adult film, I mean AV, which is porn to Japanese people. They call it AV, or adult film, or adult video. There we go, adult video. Sorry. We call it just porn. We're like, oh, that's yeah. I've never, yeah. I love the way you felt blank inside me last time. Oh, gosh. Theo then reached down with both hands, grabbing the edge of her undies, pulled them off of her, leaving her skirt on, and threw them on the bedroom floor. He looked down at her blank, staring at it as if mesmerized. The look on Theo's face told the girl that he couldn't wait to do it until she was screaming for him. Luna reached up and tugged at the waistband of his boxers. Having shed most of his clothes for his massage earlier, his hard thing sprung up to attention, and Theo met Luna's eyes for one moment. Luna paused a moment, looking over his naked body. Theo seemed to be aware that he had her full and undivided attention when Luna bit her lip. Shit, he said breathlessly. I do it. F me, Theo. Oh, if my teachers see this in the future, I apologize. Oh no. Anyone that knows me in the future, I apologize. I'm doing this for people who want to see it. Not that because I want to do it. Well, kind of. I mean, the story is kind of interesting at the same time. He lowered himself onto her. And with one hand, he guided his hand. Well, he put it in there. That's there. Just skip to that part. I just skipped like a whole paragraph of him pushing it in because I don't need to read that. This isn't something you get off to, hopefully. Sometimes you don't even need to touch at all. Came Draco's voice again in her ear, just as Theo pushed in, sounding as affected as she was by the erotic display on the mirror. Sometimes words and sounds are just enough to keep you suspended on the edge. Hermione felt lost in all manner of different sensations at once. When a woman moans in your ear, you'll do anything to make her do it again. She could hear and see the mirror. Fuck, Luna. I just spat everywhere. Once it was all the way in, he kissed her again. She inhaled sharply as he plunged back and forth. I'm not reading that part. Theo, oh, yes, please. She could hear and feel Draco, his low breathing next to her ear, his abdomen still rising and falling against her back, closing in around her like she was about to be engulfed by him. His continuous erotic narrative was causing her blood to boil in most delicious of ways. The spontaneous moans are the best. Hermione closed her eyes against his words for a second, trying to regain composure. The ones that escape from the back of her throat. The ones you whimper with, your head thrown back. Wait. The ones that escape from the back of your throat. The ones make you whimper with your head thrown back. Hermione let out a small breath and licked her bottom lip. Those are the ones that really get a man close, right on the edge. Shit, the imagery. He was making her mind spin. She didn't even know if that was his intention or not. She needed to keep her eyes trained on Theo's fantasy. Had to keep it from going elsewhere. Theo's mouth was right next to Luna's ear now, and his warm breath quickened in her ear along with the pace of his strokes. Oh, you can tell that I'm like, so what? So what? Okay. Theo's mouth was... what? Okay. It wouldn't take long for them both to finish if they kept it up with this intensity for each other. Theo knew what he had to do. His pelvis was grinding into her special thing. That's what I want to call it. And he wasn't holding back now. I don't need to hear about slapping noise. You know what I'm talking about. All his weight pressed into her now. She was completely under his mercy. He finished. He groaned, pummeling his hips into hers. Her head snapped back. He hit a sensitive spot, and she moaned and pulled him into letting all of him smother her small frame. More moans. Hermione was transfixed by the way Theo's hips moved between Luna's. They looked quite beautiful together as they moved. She chanced to glance to her right and caught Malfoy's eyes, watching the beautiful couple intently, as his own bottom lip caught between his teeth. Then he looked and spotted Hermione watching him. He gave her a look of primal and dangerous. So primal and dangerous that she was sure if they were alone, then he would have effing ruined her right then and there, in the middle of the living room. I mean, it is his house. If it was someone else's house, I would be afraid. I'd be like, you have no respect. But it is his house, so I wouldn't think of anything else. It was then that she realized that if Pansy was right, then Draco would never truly had this. The pounding, the rough, the hard sex. And if he did, he wouldn't have been able to do it for long without hurting the woman. He'd never been able to lose himself to the feeling, always needing to keep control. Watching Theo must have been killing him, because he couldn't have it for himself. Theo kissed Luna again and reached behind to grab her butt, pulling her into him more. More moans, yeah. But then a familiar sound from outside the room seemed to startle them. The main door of the dormitory corridor. One of the girls must have come back early. Hermione's breath caught in her throat. Oh, Theodore does like to live dangerously, doesn't he? Draco whispered with a small chuckle. Sorry, I just messed up. Nothing like the pacing game. He's got to make her finish before he can get himself off. I love that little game. Draco talked like he knew what he was talking about. Probably something he had done many times before back in his Hogwarts days. Hermione gulped, but watched on. The look of terror on Theo's face must have put the girl on edge, but Luna held him tight, inside her. He tried to pull out, but she squeezed her hips. She's like, "Don't stop." Great, we love that. What are you doing? Let me go, he pleaded. Just hurry and finish. I can hear her talking at the bottom of the corridor. She tried to move herself. I want you to... Oh. Hermione sucked in a breath. She wanted to finish inside me. Okay, cool. Hermione sucked in a breath, and she felt Draco tense up behind her. Of course, that was something that he had never been able to achieve, something he probably craved. Hermione's eyes hovered between watching the mirror and watching Draco out of the corner of her eye for his reaction. Theo looked at Luna for a moment before deciding his fate, and then buried his face into a pillow beside her head and started doing it some more. Harder, though, letting the headboard rattle against the wall. Oh, shit. Oh, great. So close, Luna moaned, as his hips crashed into hers wildly. Her words spurring him on. They heard those slow footsteps walking down the corridor. It wouldn't be long now before whoever it was came into the room. Theo was starting to regret giving in. If he was found, they would both be expelled. Then, throwing caution to the wind, Theo suddenly pounded into... Oh, wow. Okay. Luna as he reached for something. His back and arms started to shudder. I'm gonna finish Luna. Fuck, yes. Oh, shit. Me. Hermione practically felt it. As Theo let out a muffled moan into the pillow, Hermione glanced up at Draco. Her core contracted at the look in his eyes. He looked dangerous, dark and dangerous, like he was on the edge of something himself. His abdomen still pressed quite tightly against her back. And then, when Theo... What is wrong with us nowadays? And then when Theo shuddered and finished, she felt Draco's fingers return to her hip and grip it tighter than he had before, as if not even realizing that he had done it. He brought her butt against his crotch. Hermione held in a groan, but she said nothing, instead trying to steady her breathing, and then looked back at the mirror. Luna must have felt Theo's warm... Not saying that. And then the dormitory door opened! No! The mirror went blank, showing only the reflection of 5 faces, whose faces held a mixture of arousal, horror, and complete mortification of what they had just witnessed. Hermione heard a heavy breath in her ear and felt Draco's hand and body heat leave hers. He seems to be moving away, getting a seat on the little love seat on the other side of the living room, away from everyone to collect his thoughts. Harry went straight for his whiskey glass, filling up the tumbler 3 times and knocking them back each one before sitting in the armchair looking frazzled. Why'd you watch all of it? That's my question. Like, why didn't you, let it run and then just came back later? Something. Blaise was rubbing the back of his neck, shaking his head, and looking like he was either contemplating throwing up or going to the bathroom for a wank. Dang! Pansy sat with Theo, who she was slowly bringing around from the Erised. She had pulled up a little footstool and sat next to him, patting his arm and leg gently as he came to. As Theo opened his eyes, they widened easily, and then his head instantly went into his hands. Oh no! He groaned. You saw the butt plugs, didn't you? Yeah, and this is how it went. It's Harry piped up, causing everyone whiplash as they turned their heads to see him break their silence. It wasn't as bad as you think. Half an hour later, Hermione bid Harry farewell as she disappeared through the flue. After Pansy claiming the Erised effect a great success, they then claimed it was far too late in the evening to indulge in any more fantasies, and that everyone would need to wait until next Friday, where they would meet up again at the Golden Snitch, before making their way back to Draco's to try it on someone else. Why my flat? Draco asked. Asked her suspiciously. Why not yours? Pansy smirked at him. Because it's your birthday next Saturday, Draco, she told him matter-of-factly. And I thought it might be good to organize a little sleepover. Hermione's mouth went dry, and she looked at the ground. She was going to kill Pansy Parkinson. I don't celebrate my birthday, Pansy, you know that, he warned her. As usual, she paid no attention. No point arguing with me, Draco. Your flat has enough room for all of us, all, to get very drunk and stay over. Theo and Blaze agreed, stating that they didn't much like the flu when they had drunk one too many. Hermione saw Draco huff before shaking his head, scratching his neck, and give in to the dark-haired beauty. Whatever, he said, as was all he said. Pansy clapped her hands excitedly before putting on her coat, ready to head home herself. She looked over at Hermione. You coming, Granger? She eyed her with a raised eyebrow. The type of raised eyebrow that had Hermione knowing that she wanted to talk specifically to Draco. Hermione nodded, going about putting her own coat on. She said her goodbyes to Blaze as he disappeared through the flue, and looked up at Draco to thank him for letting them come and spend time in his own home. She took him in as he stood there, hands in the pockets of his trousers, his tie loose on either side of his buttons, still unopened when he stood tall with his shoulders back. He must have been between 6'4" and 6'5". Colossal. Dude, if he was 9 feet tall, I would be scared. 6, he's about a foot taller than me, which is fine, but I mean, I would be scared if he was Lady Demetresque scared. Okay, and he was looking right at me, right at her, waiting for her to be the first one to speak, always biding his time. Good night, Draco, and thank you for letting us invade your home this evening, she told him in a quiet voice, meeting his eyes and seeing the intensity there that she wasn't expecting. I'm sorry, an ad played when I was trying to read it. Intensity that she wasn't expecting. She saw a smirk fall up on his lips. His eyesight fell up on her thighs again for a second before he looked back up to her face. No, Granger. He practically growled, looking her dead in the eye. Thank you. And she knew he wasn't thanking her for something, for coming to his flat for a social drink. Shit. She was in so much effing trouble with this man. And we'll find out what Blaze's kink is next time. Oh boy. Okay, guys, we're going to end it here. I hope you liked these 2 stories. Well, 2 chapters. I mean, it got wild. I'm probably just going to limit the thing to barely any ads can play on this. But, oh well. Thank you guys for watching. Give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below which character is your favorite and what do you think of Theo's fantasy. I liked... He was honest with himself, I guess. It was... What he said wasn't totally a lie. But, yeah, he was lying to himself. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below. Well, you already commented. Subscribe. Put on push notifications if you haven't yet, so you're notified every time I post. I'll be happy, be healthy, and always be loving. Love you guys.